Holy City Handcraft was actually supposed to be a cooking blog, not a drink blog.
You never worked behind a bar. Like, was it intimidating to start making that kind of content?
I've been working in software for, again, like 10 years, and I just lost my job. And she was pregnant at the time with our daughter.
So I really would love to hear about how you found that work.
I feel like it's all starting to look the same, and I'll see an account and it looks just like someone else's account.
I think is going to happen though is that the bottom is going to fall out.
Miguel, better known as Holy City Handcraft, is an incredible videographer, photographer, director, and cocktail content creator with over 170,000 subscribers on Instagram. Miguel not only makes content for himself, but also directs and produces commercials and content for many prominent brands within the space. He is a maker of tiny cocktails, owner of the world's best looking vintage Land Rover, and the biggest advocate of Clear Ice Week. We both really enjoyed this conversation with Miguel, and I think you're going to get a lot of insight into him and the work that he does, and I think you're really going to love it. But all right, let's get into this episode. Welcome to Behind the Stick, man. You're one of the group of some of our first interviews, and I'm really excited to get to chat with you.
I love it. Thanks for having me. No, this is really fun. I feel like with what we do, we kind of just interact with each other on Instagram and don't really ever get any face-to-face time. So this is a change. I love it. Even though I'm gonna see you literally in like 3 days.
That's really
I know.
true.
I'm actually excited for that trip.
I was the only one not invited, apparently. I was literally the only one not invited on this trip, the CosCondas trip. Even Steve from Australia, but not me for some reason. Shame on you, CosCondas. Shame on you. I would have said no.
We'll
shame
tell
on
him.
you.
Oh man, to dive into some questions already.
Yeah, let's do
Awesome,
it. I
man.
got my own questions this time because and some of them overlap with
Oh,
your
ooh.
questions, but I got some real hard hitters
Love it.
for Miguel
Let's get
because
deep.
I'm very interested in not just what Miguel does, but just what other creators in this space do. Because when I started, there was nobody. It was tumbleweeds, and now there's a whole lot of you guys, and I'm so interested in what you guys do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Leander, when did you start your page?
We started, technically November of 2017 is when we started, and we shot a whole bunch of stuff that never really got put up.
Man, you guys were cutting edge. There was like no one on YouTube. I remember watching your videos back in the day because I was trying to educate myself on this world of making drinks, and you were like one of like 4 people. I feel like.
Right. I remember being on I popped into a Likeable Cocktails live stream, and she called me old school. She was like, "Oh, the OG old school
Oh my
cocktail
gosh.
guy is in the house," and I was like, "Oh man, I don't know how I feel about that."
Yikes! This guy's still
one
using
hurt
those
feelings,
cocktail
kid.
pitcher shakers, like.
Yeah, so it's really interesting how this space has grown in the last 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, even in the social media space, I feel like, I started back in, and this is strictly like me with my iPhone back in 2015, 2016, just posting an occasional cocktail or whatever. And it was like, I think there was maybe like people that were doing it on Instagram, the entirety of Instagram, I feel like. That was their thing, right? They had blogs, and then Instagram was kind of feeding into their blog.
And it was mostly photos, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Almost
Yeah,
all photos.
although-
I don't.
Video kind of came a little bit later, but like in
Uh-huh.
LA, there were 3 major cocktail influencers that were before me. There was Bad Birdie, there was Saeed House, Cocktails by Hawk, and there
Yep.
was a guy that doesn't really do. Oh, there was Charity Johnson, who kind of fell by the wayside in recent years. I think she just got super busy because she just took over a massive bar group here in LA and then just stopped posting very much. And then there was also a guy named, I can't remember his, there was
Brian
another, there was
Clem was
another
up
dude, a dude
there.
in Arizona that was doing a lot of stuff and
Richard,
doing photos.
Richard Allison.
Richard Allison. There
Richard
you go,
Allison.
Yeah, I
Really?
should know because
Yep.
we all had flavors of this cocktail, of like a Drinksmith cocktail together at one time. And got invited to a large house to shoot a whole day of content filled with Drinksmith stuff. But yeah, all those people were like the people that were like before me, but I don't think any of them were doing video at that time. I think it was mainly photos, really stylized cocktail photos.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what Instagram was, right? It was all photos. I mean, you got into YouTube pretty, I don't even want to say early, because people were already posting full-on cooking and cocktail videos on YouTube. But social media-wise, no one was really teaching people how to make anything online via video. Well, no, I was going to say, which is really funny, because I feel like that's kind of what TikTok has turned into, is tasty videos, you know?
Actually, a pretty good description. I'm not gonna lie to you.
When we started, it was like there was Greg from How to Drink was doing something, and then Steve the bartender had a page, and he had posted some stuff, but he didn't have he wasn't like posting very much. Like, wasn't really posting, and then there was like Thirsty Mag maybe did some stuff, and then also. Yep. Trying to remember like who all it was. Liquor.com would do something with Jim Meehan or something, like there were like one-off videos.
Yep, Tipsy.
Oh, Tipsy Bartender was there as well. So Tipsy had been, but Tipsy started when YouTube started, I believe. And,
right.
But there was
he's been making videos forever.
Tipsy's been making videos for like, I want to say he's been making videos for like 15 years or something. He's been around for a really long time. But like, what's funny is that when Marius and I started, we didn't do any market research. We had no idea that anybody was like, we knew that there was like Jim Meehan, or, there were certain like one-off videos that would happen for like craft cocktails. And I wouldn't have mentioned Tipsy if Marius didn't mention him, just because like he just like when he started his YouTube, I think I actually read a quote that like when he started YouTube, he was like, I could have done craft cocktails, but nobody was doing that. So I just started doing the cocktails that I knew would do well on that medium. And it was like a different style of cocktail from like the hardcore craft cocktails, but nobody was really doing like, I don't know, craft cocktails at the time. Aside from Greg and Steve, but we had no idea that they even existed. And what was crazy, I was telling him, is that when we found out about Steve, after we had been around for a while and we started looking at his videos were really close to what we were doing, like almost identical, which was crazy because neither one of us knew that the other really existed at the time.
So you started slowly making cocktail content around 2015?
It was, well, let me just go way back to when I started Holy City Handcraft, because I had just moved to Charleston from Orlando in 2014. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Orlando, but it's
unfortunately.
I went to Orlando when I was 13 years old to attend Disney World.
Of course, that's the main reason why
they saved up for like 10 years just for this one trip.
I could go on a tangent about how terrible Disney World is now, but I won't. But when I left Orlando, it was still very much a Red Bull vodka scene. It was very like Miami, and like I think in 2012, this cocktail bar called The Courtesy opened, and it was like legit the only craft cocktail bar, like the first of its kind in downtown Orlando, and it was down the street from me. And I was like, what is this concept of this person making you a drink for like 5-10 minutes? That's like, why aren't they putting their fingers in my drinks and serving 4 at a time? And man, I fell in love with the craft aspect of it. I love cooking, and Holy City Handcraft was actually supposed to be a cooking blog, not a drink blog.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's crazy. So fast forward to 2015 is when this idea of like, man, I was a software engineer for 10 years before I went full time with Holy City Handcraft. And that was kind of just my side gig, my creative outlet. And in 2015, I was like, man, I need to do something else, like that's not like in front of the computer screen. Like I want to like take photos or like, I don't know, something. So I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start cooking and record everything on my iPhone in photo form. And it was awful. I realized how saturated the food blog market had been at that point. And these folks that have been doing it for 10 plus, 15 plus years that are using high quality images with a photographer. And here I am with like my iPhone and like trying to like do it in my kitchen with green countertops. And, needless to say, it didn't go well. And I think I posted like old fashioned at the time because I was like really into making those after having my first one in Orlando. And it turns out like I had some like-minded people. It's like, wait, what is this? What is this new thing that you're making? It's like, well, it's this old fashioned. And the cocktail content got a lot more engagement always. And it wasn't even anything crazy. It was always like, whiskey sour, like a dark and stormy. It wasn't anything insane.
Right.
But the fact that like it was a craft cocktail that is 3 ingredients and you could make it at home was like a big appeal to a lot of people. So eventually this cooking blog had turned into a spirits and cocktail blog, and I was doing too much with Holy City Handcraft. I was like, oh, it's cooking, but it's also like restaurants, and also it's bourbon, and also it's cocktails. So, you know, through the years, I've kind of just found my niche and found my community, if you will. Like, you know, y'all had,
I mean,
and that's
I'd
kind
say
of
so.
what
You have 170,000 subscribers, so I think you found some community.
I'm not
Not to mention the amount of people who will list you as an inspiration on many things. So yeah,
always flattered by that. I, you know, looked up to a lot of people, and I still do when I was starting out. Like, you know, like Elliot, for example, Elliot, apartment bartender, man, like I remember him just skyrocketing, and I was like, man, like he's getting all these crazy brand deals, and like we ended up like becoming really good friends, and we still are. And you know, he put out his book, like I mean, he unveiled it yesterday. I'm just like, dude, like it's crazy. You know, 6-7 years ago, I remember this because Elliot I think he was still at his sales job, and he called me and he's like, hey man, I'm on a break, I'm taking a walk, but what do you think? Like, should I quit my job? Like, I think I'm going to quit my job. And I was like, dude, that's insane. But if you do it, I mean, the sky's the limit. And sure enough, you know, like he has just been crushing it. But he was such a big inspiration to me early on. Just, you know, it's always flattering to hear that from other folks too when they say that about me, because I'm just sort of taking photos with my iPhone, and just like eventually started with a camera that I found in my then fiance's closet that her ex-boyfriend gave her. It was a Canon T1i with a stock lens, and I was like, maybe I can take some photos with this. And that's how I started with photography. It's crazy, man.
Did you phase out the food like over time, or were you just like, oh no, this isn't working, I'm just gonna, like, I'm not a chef, this isn't gonna happen, I'm just gonna cut it out and start with cocktails?
Well, you know what I realized with cocktail content was the payoff, the work to pay off was a lot higher. And by that, I mean, when you're making food, and I still love cooking. Louis, I feel like we talked about this for your restaurant. It's like, are you ever going to make like food content?
Yeah, we did talk about this.
It takes a long time to cook anything. Not only that, like if you're a solo shooter, like, and you're chopping and like, you know, filling shit up, and your hands are dirty and you have to press the record button, even if you have like a remote, you know, like even if you have a remote, the remote gets dirty. So I found myself like spending an entire day shooting like one recipe, and then it goes nowhere, you know, whereas a cocktail, like you can knock out a cocktail in like 15 minutes and then steps. And then all of a sudden, like within an hour, you've got cocktail content that people at the time were really into. So for me, I still love cooking, and I cook for my family about 95% of the time. I love it. But yeah, I think eventually I want to try to dip my toes back into it, but it's going to be, I think it's going to be a little different than what it was before. I think I want to try to inject my style of drink making, but like think food. And it's going to be not sandwiches. It's going to be like, I don't know, something else. I don't know. I don't quite know what that is yet, but I do want to dip my toes back into it because I am passionate about it. So that's where I'm at with it.
So it's your full-time job, right?
It is now my full-time job as of 2020.
Good, because that was my question. I was like, when did you? So my question is, when did you decide to go full-time? And like, how scary was that decision? Because we talked about it with Elliot, right? And I can imagine that switch being like, well, I'm gonna start making videos and photos about cocktails for my job. And you have 2 kids. I know, maybe, I don't know if you had them at the time, but like that's still a big consideration.
Yeah, it was actually pretty scary at the time. So it was unrelated to COVID, oddly enough. It was 2020, and the company I was working for at the time, the software company, they were starting to outsource more jobs to Russia. Good on them.
Well, that's very topical.
Totally. And so I was like at this point where, you know, I've been working in software for, again, like 10 years. And I remember coming out, my wife was working from home at the time, just like everyone else was. And I'm coming out of the office and I'm just like, I just lost my job, and that's never happened to me before in my life. And she was pregnant at the time with our daughter, and I didn't really know how to react. I think I was a little bit in denial, like, wait, did that just happen? You know? And in my head, everyone is virtual. I could get a software job pretty easily, I think. And, you know, I was talking to my wife about it. She's like, holy shit, like, what should I do? Like, you know, and she said, why don't you just try doing Holy City Handcraft full time? It's like, at that point, I had already, you know, gotten 4 years worth of just relationships. And I think I was making about 20%, 30% of my like actual salary, or the value of my salary with my software job. And she's like, why don't we just try and just like see what happens? And in my head, like, no way that's gonna work, right? But honestly, if it wasn't for her, I probably would have just found another software job just to play it safe, right? It's always easier to have something that's more consistent, and you're not kind of just like waiting for a paycheck. You also don't get to experience, you know, these life moments when you don't take the risks. So I'm very risk averse. And so I told my wife, if I don't make 75% of my salary every month that I am doing Holy City Handcraft, I will go ahead and find another software job, and of 75% of my old salary. And it just didn't happen, you know, especially during COVID.
Wow.
Right? COVID, everything shifted towards making drinks at home and creating content for people who are now drinking at home. And the subject matter of Holy City Handcraft just happens to be teaching people how to make drinks at home. And so it was this perfect storm of, you know, these brands, you know, unfortunately, like, there a lot of bad shit happened in COVID, but like, I don't know if I would have been as successful making the transition to a full-time, like, you know, photographer, videographer, and content creator if I wasn't given the opportunities just because that's what the market needed at the time, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, before you knew it, I was doing a cocktails at home series, and brands were reaching out to try to partner up on making, hey, here's 3 easy recipes to make with our bourbon, you know, with Miguel. And, you know, so it was a weird transition, but, you know, I always like count my blessings, because here I am almost 4 years later, still doing what I love doing and being flexible enough to, like, you know, have my kids, take my kids to school and pick them up because I can. And so it's been a blessing.
I've heard from a couple of other folks who that is a similar story, where COVID was really like this catalyst for a lot of growth. And I think it was for me as well. But one thing I find fascinating about you, Miguel, is that you not only produce a lot of content for yourself. Obviously, you have your own page where you talk about your, you know, you make your cocktail videos, recipes, similar to kind of, you know, what I do and what Leandro does. But what I find fascinating about you is that you work a lot more on the commercial side as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're a director, you're a producer of content, commercial work for other brands. And I would love to hear from you about how did that come about, and how is that different between, you know, making content for yourself versus for others, and which you prefer.
Well, and also, like before you answer, I want to just sort of double down on how remarkable that is, because, you know, I worked in the bar industry for a very long time, and I know a lot of brand reps. And what I was led to believe, like through COVID, was that the bottom had sort of fallen out of content creation for brands, because during COVID, what brands were doing were taking their brand ambassadors and saying, well, now you're going to make content too. And so I knew a lot of brand ambassadors that were also creating content, like my friend Elliot Montero over at Montenegro, where he was he had the dual role of creating content and then also being the brand ambassador, going around and setting up, you know, events, and then also checking in on different clients. And so I really would love to hear about how you found that work, how that kind of came to you, and how you navigated it.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, Elliot is awesome, and he was already a very talented photographer and videographer, and, you know, had some Sony connections too, which has been awesome. I love talking to Elliot. We nerd out a lot about camera gear and videos. And they're lucky to have him as a brand ambassador as well. He's amazing. But in terms of the work, at that point, I had already been taking, I would say, semi-professional photo and video for about 3 years. So I had a little bit of experience under my belt in terms of just cocktail photography. And at that point, I was just kind of trying to reframe what Holy City Handcraft was, right? So yes, it is a way for me to develop recipes and share them with like-minded people and consumers. But I was trying to pitch myself as maybe someone who is just like the everyday guy, right? And how can we relate to these folks also stuck at home miserable in a way that is relatable, in a way that is, still a little elevated to keep up with whatever brand standard that they did have. And that's kind of how I pitched these ideas of let's make a cocktails at home series. And one of the things that I wanted to do during this time was I didn't want to alienate the industry, because a lot of them are my friends here in Charleston, especially. And it sounds weird to say right now, the idea back then, because of COVID and how crazy dangerous and there's so many unknowns, right? But I really wanted to get them involved in this project that I had of, hey, there's so many talented folks here in Charleston, especially bartenders, that aren't serving anyone right now. How cool would it be if we got a bartender from, 5 different restaurants, and we got them to create a recipe for, say, Old Forester, and did holiday old fashions, and there were all of a sudden, there were 5 very unique recipes for a brand, right? The well-known brand, but all these Charleston bartenders that just blew it out of the water. And it's crazy. We shot here at the bar to keep it contained. And I would wipe down the bar for every single shoot. We were both wearing masks up until, it was time to shoot. And so it became this thing of I wanted to highlight the industry folks too, because if you can't get their cocktails at their establishments right now, you can at least learn how to make it at home. So I didn't want to make it all about me, but me as the everyman, but also you still want to enjoy the cocktails that you have at their restaurants. And so I kind of framed it that way as well. It's help them make content to push out there. So that was pretty successful, and that was really fun for us, because at that point, you miss your friends. It was cool to see them and see them in their element. And yeah, so that was kind of how that work came in around that time.
And so, I mean, and I'm sure the brands really appreciated it, because, you're giving them the kind of content that at the time was everyone else was doing something similar. Like Leandro was saying, a lot of the brand ambassadors just became content creators, but it might have not been the most, there wasn't there are a lot today of a lot more dedicated content creators to do that, who have that that ability to do it, where it's just part of our natural workflow.
For sure.
And so I'm sure that the brands appreciated it. And so, now, well, I'm going to maybe go a little bit deeper. What's the coolest project that you've worked for with a brand? And if you can't name the brand, I get it. But what's been one of the coolest projects that you've worked with or worked on with a brand?
Are you thinking kind of commercially?
Commercially, yeah.
Oh,
just so people can get a better sense of what that's like, because I think that maybe having the insight of you making your own videos at home. I think a lot of us have seen content creators, but I think that from a perspective of the commercial side, I think that people would love to hear that insight. And I would personally love to hear that insight.
For sure, yeah. I follow a good amount of, and I'm sure you guys do too, commercial spirits photographers and directors. Jason Bailey Studios, I don't know if you guys follow him. He's absolutely cool. He shoots all of Patron, most of the Bacardi portfolio. But if you've seen it in an ad, or if you've seen it on a POS, that's him. It's
wow,
the stuff he does. But my favorite project, which is also the most challenging for me to date, was the one I did back last April 2023, and it was for Blade & Bow whiskey, which is Diageo. It was incredible. My favorite part about the commercial production side of things is hiring a crew that just gels. It's I call them my A-team. It's cool to think about something that needs to be done, and that person's already doing it. So
yeah,
these commercial productions, they're evolved. It's months sometimes of production work or pre-production work. and we'll have, the creative brief from the agency or with the brand's help. And so this one was going to be, we want a hunting, like outdoorsy kind of shoot, because it's, Blade and Bow was very much like garden gun and like outdoors and sporting. And it's like, but we also want a fancy dinner party indoors, a fancy outdoor party in the garden that's beautiful. And we also want to shoot like 4 or 5 cocktail videos. So, this was about a month and a half of pre-production work with the agency and the brand on multiple calls with my producer that I hire out because I was playing director for this one. But man, it was a crew of, I want to say like 10 or 12, not including talent. But, you hire your prop stylist, your food stylist, your drink stylist. They have an assistant. You have your producer, your digitech, your first AC, your director of photography. And then I think we had like 5 models and then multiple PAs. First AC, your director of photography. And then I think we had like 5 models and then multiple PAs. But it's just like, it's so challenging when it's so fun and so rewarding when you're finally at that day, when you're shooting all the content together and everything's just like flowing. It's the best.
Like, where were you guys shooting? Did they fly you out, or was it all locally in Charleston and you had to figure it out? Like, did they provide any support?
Yes. So they provide all of the creative, right? The ideas of the vibes, right? So they'll send kind of a mood board of like, hey, this is kind of what we're looking for. They wanted to shoot in Charleston only because Blade and Bow has some ties here because of Gardening Gun. And, we probably scouted like 14 locations and like 4 different wooded areas and then multiple batteries or multiple houses on the battery because they wanted that like elegant feel where it was like, nice outdoors and indoors. And then the biggest prop that they kind of wanted was a vintage sport utility vehicle, but they were all Land Rovers. So we found a company here that rented one out to us. And that's also the reason why I have a Land Rover now, because they sold me on getting one.
I was going to ask about your Land Rover. Because I am so jealous. For those of you guys who don't know, who maybe are just listening, Miguel has a beautiful vintage Land Rover. It has like cloth drop top. It's like a Instagram wet dream, for a lack of a better word, because it just photographs so well. I understand that he is a very stylish guy with his photography and videography, but every time you post a photo or a video of your Land Rover, I'm just like, Jesus, man, it's so good looking. It's so nice.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. The guy who we rented that Land Rover from for that shoot, because I was like, man, like this, it was so fun to drive because I ended up picking it up and driving it to the set.
Basically, you were like, I don't know. And then he was probably like, come on, man, you want a Land Rover. I really need to sell this Land Rover. You're like, how much is it? And he's like, it's only $20,000, but you could get it on a finance plan. And now APR was super low. And you're like, good, I'm doing it. I'm buying a Land Rover.
I didn't even know they were in Charleston. So this company, you guys should look it up. It's called Himalaya. Their Instagram account's Drive Himalaya, and they restore old Land Rovers. And so that's who I rented it from. This guy just happened to have an unrestored Land Rover, and I was like, man, like how much are these? Like this is crazy. Like these are awesome. He's like, actually, the owner of the company is selling his for like really cheap. You should come check it out. And I was like, okay. And I did, and I fell in love with it, and now I have a Land Rover. So that's the long and the short of it.
So, Miguel, to follow up with that, you've done a lot of commercial work, you've done a lot of work for yourself. Between the two, how do you kind of compare and contrast it, and which one do you prefer personally?
The commercial work is a lot more work, but I think the downside to being a content creator, except for Leander, you actually have someone you work with, but for the most part, I'm alone. I shoot by myself and edit by myself. And I find it to be a lot of fun to be on set, talking to people, talking to clients, talking to my friends who are helping me with this shoot. So I don't know, maybe it's because I like working with people. I do tend to like seeing a client's vision come to life, like on paper to screen. And I think that's like fun, so rewarding. But if you're going to ask me like which one I like better, I think commercial work, honestly. I think the Instagram thing or, what I've been doing, I feel like I've been doing it so long that I'm getting, to be honest, like just a little burnt out on it. And I'm
It's a safe space. You can confide in us, sir.
Yeah. And I think a couple other folks would, kind of feel the same way, because I don't know about y'all. I feel like, our genre, our subject matter, if you will, is a lot more saturated than it was, 5 years ago. And there's points where I feel like it's all starting to look the same. And, I'll see an account and it looks just like someone else's account that, obviously got inspiration from that account. And I think there's nothing wrong with getting inspiration from another account, but like, I feel like when you start like, down to prop placement, copying like what it is, I think it starts to look a little odd. And I don't know. I don't know.
Because, it's never been easier to be a content creator. The quality of camera on a phone is amazing and incredible. And so I think to your point, it is a relatively saturated market, but it's tough because look, I said it before, like I was really inspired by Leandro and his work on YouTube, like you were saying earlier. And so, that's someone who I wanted to emulate. But now there's just, because of the ease of it and the fact that at any moment someone's video can just blow up, it's just become so much easier to be a content creator. But the whole idea of burnout, dude, it's serious. It's like, for a lot of people maybe don't know this, and oh my God, the guy who has all these followers is bitching and complaining. I get that, right? It sounds like I'm just complaining. But the truth is, like, for you to really maintain success, like you have to post an abnormally amount a week.
Yes.
But I gotta say though that like, I don't know how this is gonna come off when I say this. I hope it doesn't come off as negative, but I gotta say that I think is gonna happen though is that the bottom is gonna fall out from the, like, there is gonna be a moment where, because the thing is that there's a very big disconnect between like what gets popular on the internet and then what's actually good, right?
Yes.
And sometimes those things come together and form like a chocolate and vanilla style partnership, like when Doritos and Empirical got together and made an incredible Doritos spirit that is actually quality, which I will stand behind 100%. Yes. But a lot of times, for the most part, a lot of what gets popular isn't necessarily what is quality. And so like for my own work, I've always tried to just do what I know is quality and put out the best, sort of not only the best recipe that I've encountered, but also making sure that I credit everybody, because like my content is like 85% other people's recipes. I think that they should be credited because as the front-facing person, you're going to get most of the credit anyway because they found it on your account. And so it's really important to credit the people, which I kind of seen a lot of not crediting going on, which has bothered me a bunch. But I got to say, though, that I think that, a lot of people try to get clickbait as opposed to making something that is authentic. And I think that clickbait content is going to fall out at some point because I don't think that Instagram cocktails, which is already kind of a small demographic of people, if you're thinking about like people who follow food content, not everybody drinks. People are I think there's a lot of people that are saying, I want to become a creator and I don't know what to do. Oh, this cocktail thing is really popular. I really am inspired by some of the people that do it. I'm going to do that. And then the onus is like, it's like then people start chasing views as opposed to like actually trying to figure out the craft of what they're doing, understanding what they're doing and putting out like good actual recipes and content. You know what I mean? Or maybe there's between like what is good content and then what is a good recipe, or what is like, but it's like, what is good content as far as video is concerned, or is the content of your video good? You know what I mean? Like correct. There's a disconnect between that.
Well, I think there's this obsession with, going virality, and that's whether or not your content is good or not. And it's a lot of it has to do with doing something that people have never seen before, no matter how ridiculous it is, right? So putting Parmesan cheese on an espresso martini is just...
Oh my God, we're going to talk about this. I think it's going to come up in every single...
It might.
Just as an example, no one's ever seen that before. It went viral. People vouched for it that it was good, right? And it was hit or miss, right? It was something that people were talking about. But you have the other, and it was a high quality, like produced video, beautifully shot, and it's Jordan being Jordan. But there's also the type of videos that, do you guys remember that lady who put like Skittles in a coffee maker and then like ran the brew cycle with vodka? And it was like, this is how to make Skittle vodka. And everyone was just like, she fed off the negative comments on that post, and that's how it went viral. And with all those negative posts come also those people who are not us, that, you know, have kind of done our research and like have been around for a little longer and kind of know what makes a good cocktail, that are just like, oh, that is a good idea because it's easy, you know? So it's tough. I do think you have a point there, Leander, where it's like, are people making content to go viral, or are they putting, like, I don't know about you guys, I put out content, or I started this page because I wanted to share like this knowledge and this like craft of like making cocktails to serve to people that are good, you know? And I think the quality of content just like came along with that. But I think there's this obsession now with going viral. I was watching this this YouTube video, it was MKBHD, and he was talking about how, you know, you're starting to see a lot of like YouTubers saying they're going to quit YouTube. And it's all these people that have been on YouTube for a while, like, you know, I'm going to quit. And all it was they need a break from what social media has become.
Oh, right. Like every single person that made a video that said why I quit YouTube or I quit in big letters never actually quit YouTube. Right. And maybe they might have even taken a short like break or something, but that whole I quit YouTube or why I quit YouTube was clickbait. The whole thing was 100%. Just to get people to watch that video to see if they can't make the fact that they're quitting go viral.
Exactly. Except Tom Scott. Exactly.
Except for Tom Scott. I guess Tom Scott actually quit.
Yeah, no, he did.
Yeah. He's the one guy. He's the one guy that actually quit.
Casey,
you know, and then there are people who kind of quit, like Emma Chamberlain, who didn't announce that they were quitting. They just kind of quietly quit. You know?
And then, like Miguel just said, Casey too. Casey, I think, has posted 3 videos in the last year.
Casey Neistat made $25 million last year. He doesn't need to be a YouTuber anymore. And I think that when you make that kind of money, when you make that kind of money, you don't need to be a YouTuber. Then people say Mr. Beast, but Mr. Beast made $50 million last year and spent $48 million of it on videos. He constantly makes himself go broke.
For me, this podcast is an attempt at working on exactly that problem that you're referring to, about the burnout, what kind of. My theory is the content around cocktails just stale? Not because. Is it because people aren't being creative enough, or is it because they've only settled on one format and everybody's just doing that one format, right? Yeah. So my theory is that, like any niche, there are ways to innovate and there are other ways of doing things. And so my theory with this is we can hopefully with this podcast we can provide another way to talk about a lot of the creators, not just on the cocktail side, but on food side eventually, and maybe when we talk to other folks outside of these spheres, to just talk about people, because that's the real thing that cocktails is about. Like, the making of a cocktail is cool. It's fine. It's but once you get past the how to make it, you can make any cocktail. There's no secret. Like you're like, it's not like cooking where you're like, ooh, we got to learn how to, do X, Y, Z. Like, it's once you get it, it's just pretty simple. It's plug and play recipes, and they're always going to appeal to mass audiences. But I think that at the end of the day, it's about people. It's about stories. It's about sharing a drink and talking about, people's lives and what's going on.
Absolutely. And I think that's been the cool part about this, even our conversation today, like talking about all these different people who have been doing it for longer than we have. And, here we are talking about it like 15 years later, right?
Yeah.
Like, talking about them and their journey. And I do think that this community, there's a lot of toxicity on Instagram and social media in general. But I will say that the cocktail community, it is one of the more the cocktail community. Yeah, you're good, man. We can hear you. I will say the cocktail community is one that there's a lot of positivity. There's a lot of support. And I think, even starting out, as someone who, had never worked behind a bar, but had plenty of industry friends and, did the research, like the amount of support that I had gotten from folks that are real bartenders, and they're like, hey man, that's awesome. Like what you did there works. That's great. Like that's like the biggest compliment to me, and I think,
I bet.
And it's such a space to be able to give people your thoughts like that, your thoughts of positivity and support.
Of course.
And
were you ever intimidated? Sorry, I had a thought. Like, did you ever, because like you said, you never worked behind a bar. Like, was it intimidating to start making that kind of content?
Yeah, that was like one of my biggest insecurities. I feel like coming up was just like, well, I'm not a real bartender. Like, what am I doing back here? What am I doing teaching people how to make drinks? Like, who am I, At this point, I think I'm pretty confident in my skill set and like, in terms of just knowledge around the bar and like what spirits are and how to use them.
Yeah, actually, I had a question that like kind of ties into this because I was just wondering like, what goes into the your creative process as far as like selecting cocktails or creating cocktails. Because I didn't know whether you had a bartending background or not. So, I can pretty much tell when I see people's content if they know what they're talking about or if they don't. But, I've always felt that you're someone that knows what they're talking about, when it comes to spirits and cocktails. And I haven't recreated any of your recipes, but I've looked at them. And I've been making cocktails for so long now, I think I could just look at a recipe and say this is going to be quality or it's going to be unbalanced. Yours are pretty good. So, how did you start to even think about it if you didn't know anything about it to begin with?
Yeah, I didn't even mention this. I learned a lot, like I said, through YouTube. One of the channels that I watched probably the most at that time when I was trying to learn was Small Screen Network. So it was Charlotte Boise and Jamie Boudreau.
Incredible bartenders. Incredible bartenders.
For them to kind of like, I think it was Jamie's video. I remember him teaching the golden ratio cocktails when it comes to like sours or, anything. It's plug and play. Like I always, when I teach cocktail classes or when I was teaching them during COVID, it's like, man, like don't get intimidated by these names and these ingredients for cocktails. If you can make a whiskey sour, you can make a Tommy's margarita, you can make a daiquiri, you can make a gimlet. There are endless amounts of cocktails you can make just with the same recipe, right? So for me,
you started to learn about cocktail families, basically.
Exactly, right? So, well, this is a sour, this is a buck, like so it's like, for the most part, I was telling you, there's only like 8 base cocktails, like, and then the rest is kind of just plug and play. So for me, I again had loved cooking, and I attribute that to I had two Filipino, I was always in the kitchen with them, and they taught me everything I need to know about cooking and what flavors go together and how to like taste things to make sure you can adjust for whatever that is. And I found it to be so helpful behind the bar. And, for some of my cocktails, I draw a lot of inspiration from, what they cook or had cooked or make. I did a pop-up with Chef Andy Ricker last year for Charleston Wine and Food. And that was the most intimidating thing. It's like, here comes like James Beard chef. And he's like, you're into a cocktail pairing and you're doing the cocktails. Here's my menu. And,
oh, that's awesome.
But, I thought about like, hey, you know what? Like that's his food is incredible. And it's a lot of the Southeast, but like, I'm going to do me. Like, I want to do like Filipino inspired cocktails. Those flavors go on so well with what you're cooking. And so I did very much a Filipino inspired menu. And I think like one of my most popular recipes, probably the buko pandan, like, it's coconut and pandan. And then I also have one that's ube. And, talking to the folks while I was presenting this cocktail at this dinner, and I found myself going back to like, well, I had this, after dinner, like my grandma would make this, and it's like one of the things that stuck out in my head from my childhood. And it's like, it's sappy, but it's also like, no, I really did draw inspiration from like all those years ago when my grandma was teaching me how to make the dessert version of this, like the real food version of this. And I just translated into a cocktail because I knew those flavors work together.
Those are my favorite cocktails. When people are like, hey, this is the inspiration I got for it and it's attached to my childhood. That's the ones that resonate with me.
Totally. And it's the best. Again, it's about people. It's about the story. Like, and I think that's when you get to share that with other folks, you're not only sharing a cocktail with them, you're sharing your culture, and you're sharing a story and your life with them. So I think that's, I've never worked behind the bar, but I do think that's got to be one of the most rewarding things about bartending, is being able to like put something in front of someone that no one has ever tried before, and for them to be like, that's incredible, man. Like, that's so cool. It's like, that's so
100%. Although the work of bartending is like, I mean, the background stuff is about making cocktails, and about like, you know, formulating cocktails. But like the actual day to day of a bartender is only 10% about making cocktails,
100%,
and 90% about like, you know, providing hospitality and kind of emceeing someone's evening.
Miguel, if you could make and have a drink with anyone in the world, alive or dead, who would it be, and what would you make?
You know, I had to think about this, and I was going to say Anthony Bourdain because I want a lot of Anthony.
Oh, that would have been the second one in a row.
But
Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, well,
I'm gonna next guest. I'm gonna be like, you can't say Anthony Bourdain.
but who wouldn't, right? Just a well-traveled dude that's super interesting and likes to drink, right?
Yep.
But my first would be Alton Brown. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you could actually go have a drink with him.
I know. I'm in Charleston quite often, so I think he got married here. So
I think you probably have enough followers to reach out and get a response.
You should test that theory out.
Right? No, I was eating at the sushi restaurant last year, and the guy was like, "Man, I'm so nervous. I have to prep tomorrow for this guy coming in." And I was like, "Who is it?" It's like, "It's Alton Brown." It's like, there's only 14 seats in that restaurant, so I was like, "Holy shit, man!" Like, I missed him by.
Oh my gosh.
Like.
Oh man.
But the reason why it's Alton Brown is because I drew a lot of inspiration for my food through him as well. Like, you know, just his cooking, like Good Eats was like a pillar of my childhood in terms of like being able to catch Good Eats on cable, but like just the science of it all and like learning why, you know, this reacts with that. Like, it was like Bill Nye for food, and I always thought it was so interesting. But yeah, like now me as an adult, like to have like a bourbon with Alton Brown, I think would be super fun, you know. But yeah,
So you would just pour him a bourbon?
probably make him some sort of
Is that
like
the drink?
bourbon.
Alton Brown does. To be fair, Alton Brown does seem like a bourbon kind of dude to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's
He seems
from,
like he drinks some bourbon, he eats some, you know, I don't know, some sugar snap cookies or something. Louis, who's yours? Did we go over this last week? Because I'm like, now
We
I'm
did
dying
go
to
over it
know
last
who
week,
yours is.
but you didn't tell me yours last week.
It's definitely. I'll tell you, it's not at all. Not at all. Who's yours? I think mine's pretty good though, but.
Well, I talked about it last week, but real quick, it was Sir Alex Ferguson, who was the manager of
Sir
Manchester
Alex,
United.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I remember now. Mine is George Carlin. That's who I want to have a drink
Oh,
with.
that's a good one.
Yeah,
would you
that's
make-
who
what would
I
you-
would have a drink with. Oh man, George Carlin seems like I don't know. I'd probably make him like an old fashioned or maybe like a Sazerac. I can see him drinking a Sazerac, or even a Manhattan. I don't know. You know, something lowbrow, highbrow thing, like a highbrow, lowbrow drink. You know.
I like it.
And I would just want to sit there and talk politics with him. That would be my thing. You know.
I love it.
Awesome.
Have either of you had the opportunity to make a drink for a notable person, like a celebrity or like, you know, anything like that?
Yes. I'm assuming Leandro more than I, because he was in LA. Prior to when I was working at this, I was working at a place just outside the city of Boston, and this would be a local one. Like, I got to make a drink for Danny Ainge and his son. He was the general manager of the Boston Celtics, and for me, that was a big thing. And the other one was the dude who played Shaggy in the live action Scooby-Doo. I forget his name. I think it's oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. And he was a really nice dude. He was one of the nicest dudes I've ever met.
Does that sound right?
Which one?
Skeet Ulrich? Does that sound right?
It was Matthew
other guy.
something.
Okay.
Matthew Lillard. That's what it was.
Yeah. Okay.
Matthew Lillard. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I live in LA and I worked at a bar called Cole's, which is a very, very famous French dip joint and cocktail spot, and the Varnish was in the back, so we constantly had celebrities in there, especially at the Varnish, although I didn't work at the Varnish. So I've made old drinks for a lot of people, like a lot of like celebrities, but never like a huge celebrity. Never made a drink for like a really big like A-list celebrity, but I've made drinks for a bunch of different people from film and TV. I mean, they used to shoot Mad Men in our bar, so
Well, that's awesome.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I've made classic drinks for a lot of the cast and crew of Mad Men. For I don't know who else. Trying to think. There's that show Workaholics.
Yeah. Yep.
I've made a drink for I think all of them actually, like all of the main dudes on that show. Yeah, Adam Devine for 100%. Yeah,
yep,
for sure. Yeah, I don't know, but that's like living in LA. It's very run-of-the-mill here.
Sure, makes sense.
Well, great. Well, Miguel, man, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having you on the show, and it's been a pleasure getting a chat with you and getting to know you a little bit more. Leandro, you have any last word, guest here?
I mean, I'll just like ditto everything you said, and then just like keep killing it on the intrawebs. I don't know, like
absolutely, man.
I'll keep killing it with the commercial content, and yeah, I don't know. I enjoy what you do. I hope we get to talk again.
Yeah.
Thank you,
dude. Likewise, thank you guys for having me. This was again. It's always fun to talk to real people. So.
Oh yeah.